The realization seemed to dawn on both combatants simultaneously. As their battle reached its climax, with the very foundations of the ocean floor cracking under the force of their conflict, both Thor and Jormungandr suddenly ceased their attacks. "This is not our time," the world serpent said, his massive form slowly uncoiling. "The threads of fate decree that we shall meet again, in a place and time when the outcome will not be constrained by destiny's requirements." Thor, breathing heavily from the tremendous exertion, nodded in agreement. "When that time comes, Serpent, we shall finish what we have begun here." Hello, if you're liking these stories, it'd mean a lot if you hit that like button or subscribed. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment with your location and the time there. It always amazes me how people all over the world drift off to sleep with these. Until then, let this testing serve as a measure of what each of us is capable of. Jormungandr's great eyes regarded Thor with something that might have been respect. "You have proven yourself worthy of the legends that surround you, Thunder God. When the final battle comes, I will face you without shame, knowing that I meet a foe worthy of the struggle." With that, the world serpent began to sink back into the deepest trenches of the ocean, his massive form disappearing into the darkness like a living mountain returning to the earth. Thor, alone in the depths, felt the weight of the encounter settling upon him like a cloak of prophecy. The ascent to the surface was a journey through his own thoughts as much as through the physical depths of the ocean. He had faced the world serpent and proven his strength, but he had also seen the true magnitude of the challenge that awaited him in the final battle. Jormungandr was not merely a large serpent. He was a force of nature, a being whose power rivaled that of the gods themselves. When Thor finally broke the surface of the ocean, he found Aegir's ship waiting for him, its crew silent with awe at what they had witnessed. The battle in the depths had sent shock waves through the entire ocean, creating tidal waves that had reached shores thousands of miles away. "It is done," Thor said simply as he climbed aboard the ship. "The world serpent and I have taken each other's measure. When the time comes for our final confrontation, we will both know what we face." The journey back to Asgard was accomplished in contemplative silence, each member of the crew lost in their own thoughts about the implications of what had occurred. The testing between Thor and Jormungandr had been more than just a battle. It had been a glimpse into the nature of the final battle that would determine the fate of all the realms. In the halls of Asgard, the tale of Thor's encounter with the world serpent would be told and retold, each version adding new details to the legend. But for Thor himself, the most important result of the battle was not the glory it brought him, but the knowledge he had gained about himself and his destiny. He had faced the greatest challenge of his life and emerged victorious, but he had also learned that victory in the final battle was far from certain. The world serpent was a foe unlike any other, and their next encounter would determine not just the fate of gods and men, but the very structure of reality itself. As he stood once again on the walls of Asgard, looking out over the realms he had sworn to protect, Thor felt the weight of destiny settling upon his shoulders. The testing was over, but the greater trial lay ahead. And when that time came, he would be ready to face whatever fate had in store for him and the world he loved. The unveiling of Mjolnir, a saga of Thor's Nordic majesty. Part 1. The dawn of Thunder Thor's early life and lineage. Hark, travelers of the realms, and lend your ears to a tale woven from the very fabric of the cosmos, a saga of might and unwavering will, before the twilight of the gods, when the frost giants still stalked the farthest reaches of Jotunheimr with insolent pride, and the very sky trembled with an unseen power, there walked among the Aesir a deity unlike any other. He was the son of All-Father Odin and the mighty Jr, the very earth itself, and his name echoed like the storm's first roar, Thor. His might was legendary, his hammer a symbol of cosmic order, yet few truly grasped the trials he faced, the cunning he overcame, and the profound burden he bore as the true protector of the 9 worlds. But how did this god of thunder rise to such unparalleled power? Prepare to witness the untold saga of Mjolnir's birth and the shaping of a legend. In the days when the world was younger and the boundaries between realms held firmer meaning, Odin Allfather walked the paths of creation with purpose burning in his single eye. His wisdom was vast as the void itself, yet he understood that wisdom alone could not shield the realms from the encroaching darkness that dwelt in the hearts of giants and monsters. What was needed was strength. Not the brutal, mindless force of the Jotnar, but strength wedded to righteousness, power guided by an unshakable moral compass. It was this need that drew the Allfather to court Jr., she who was the very embodiment of Midgard's fertile soil and bedrock foundation. Jr. was no mere giantess, though giants claimed kinship with her. She was the earth given form and consciousness, the mother of all growing things, the foundation upon which the great tree Yggdrasil itself took root. When Odin sought her hand, he sought not just a consort, but a partner whose very essence would complement his own. Sky wisdom joined with earth strength, thought wedded to action. Their union was no simple courtship of words and gifts, but a cosmic joining that sent tremors through all 9 realms. The very stones of Asgard hummed with anticipation, and the wise Norns at the Well of Fate wove new threads into their eternal tapestry. For they knew, as all beings touched by prophecy know, that from this union would come a child destined to stand as the final bulwark against the forces of chaos. Witness the very first crackle of thunder that echoed through the 9 realms. It was not the sound of storm clouds gathering, but the heartbeat of an unborn god, already calling to his destiny. The birth of Thor was attended by portents that would be remembered until the end of days. As Jairus' labor began, the skies above Asgard darkened with clouds that had never before been seen. Not the gray-black of ordinary storms, but clouds shot through with veins of silver and gold, pregnant with an energy that made the very air taste of copper and ozone. The Einherjar, those honored dead who served as Odin's army, gathered in silent ranks to witness what they sensed would be a moment of cosmic significance. When the child drew his first breath, thunder rolled across the heavens with such force that the walls of Gladsheim itself trembled. The sound was not harsh or threatening, but deep and resonant, like the tolling of a bell forged from the heart of a mountain. In that moment, every giant in every realm felt a chill of premonition, though they could not yet name what they feared. The infant Thor was unlike any child born to god or mortal. Where other babes might cry or whimper, he laughed, a sound like distant thunder playing across summer hills. His eyes, when they opened, held the storm gray of his father's wisdom, but with an added depth that spoke of his mother's steady strength. His tiny fists grasped at the air, as if already reaching for a weapon that existed only in the threads of fate. Odin, cradling his son for the first time, felt the child's potential like a living thing. Here was power that would shake the foundations of the world, but power that would serve rather than dominate. The Allfather smiled, a rare expression on his oft-troubled face, and spoke words that would echo through the halls of prophecy. "You shall be called Thor, for you shall be the thunder that answers when the innocent call for aid." The early years of Thor's life in Asgard were marked by signs that none could ignore. As a toddler, he would laugh with delight at the sound of thunderstorms, clapping his hands in rhythm with the lightning. The palace cats, normally dignified creatures, would flee in mock terror from his playful charges, for even as a child, his footsteps carried the weight of approaching tempests. By his 5th year, Thor had already begun to display the strength that would become his defining characteristic. During a feast honoring the harvest, he approached the great table where the gods dined and, with innocent curiosity, attempted to lift Thor's father's drinking horn. The horn, crafted from the tusk of a primordial beast and heavy enough to challenge grown gods, rose in the boy's grasp as if it were fashioned from hollow reeds. The assembled Aesir fell silent, watching in amazement as the child drained the horn's contents, mead that would have left lesser beings insensible, and asked with perfect seriousness if there was more. It was then that Odin knew the time had come to begin his son's true education. But this would be no ordinary tutoring in the arts of war and wisdom. Thor would need to learn not just how to wield his immense strength, but when to restrain it, not just how to fight, but what was worth fighting for. The boys' training began in earnest under the watchful eyes of the Einherjar. These were warriors who had proven their valor in mortal life and had been chosen to serve in Odin's hall until the final battle. They had expected to teach a pampered prince the rudiments of swordplay and shield work. Instead, they found themselves struggling to match the enthusiasm and natural prowess of a child who could split practice shields with his bare hands and who approached each lesson with the joy of a born warrior. Yet for all his physical gifts, it was Thor's character that truly set him apart. When sparring with the Einherjar, he would always help a fallen opponent to his feet. When training with weapons, he would carefully control his strength to avoid causing harm. When the lessons turned to strategy and tactics, he would listen with intense concentration, understanding instinctively that true strength lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to protect. His relationship with his half-siblings further revealed the depth of his character. Baldur, the Shining One, beloved by all for his beauty and gentle nature, might have been seen as a rival for their father's attention. Instead, Thor appointed himself as Baldur's protector, declaring with childish solemnity that his brother's light was too precious to be dimmed by any shadow. When Vali, born of Odin's union with Rindr, arrived in Asgard as a youth already grown and bearing the weight of his destined role as Baldur's avenger, Thor welcomed him with open arms, seeing in him not competition but kinship. And when Vidar, the silent god destined to survive Ragnarok, would sit for hours in contemplative quiet, Thor would join him, learning the value of stillness even as his own nature called him to action. These moments of quiet communion taught Thor that strength could be found not only in the storm's fury, but in the calm that follows. As Thor approached his majority, a change began to manifest in his presence. The casual displays of strength that had marked his childhood began to take on a different quality. When he walked the halls of Asgard, the very stones seemed to acknowledge his passage. When he spoke, his voice carried undertones of distant thunder. When he laughed, the sound seemed to echo from the sky itself. It was during this time that Odin began to speak to his son of the true nature of his destiny. They would walk together through the lesser-known paths of Asgard, away from the bustle of court and the demands of ceremony, and the All-Father would share the burden of his knowledge. "My son," Odin said during one such walk, as they paused beside the well of Ord where the Norns dwelt, "you have been gifted with strength beyond measure, but with that gift comes a responsibility that will define not just your life, but the fate of all the realms. The giants grow restless in their halls of ice and stone. The ancient enemies of order stir in their prisons. The time approaches when the gods will need a champion who can stand against the forces of chaos, not with cunning or wisdom alone, but with the pure, unwavering strength of righteous purpose." Thor listened, his young face grave with understanding. "Father, I feel the weight of this destiny in my bones. When I dream, I see great battles and hear the cries of those who call for aid. My heart burns to answer those calls, but I know I am not yet ready." Odin smiled, pride evident in his weathered features. "You are ready in ways that matter most, my son. Your strength grows daily, yes, but more importantly, your sense of justice remains pure. You fight not for glory or conquest, but because you cannot bear to see the innocent suffer. That is the mark of a true protector." The All-Father's words proved prophetic. As Thor's 18th year approached, messengers began arriving in Asgard with troubling news. Giant raiding parties had been seen gathering at the borders of Alfheim. Strange creatures, neither holy giant nor troll, had been spotted in the wilder regions of Vanaheim. Most disturbing of all, the protective barriers that had long kept the worst of the Jotnar confined to the coldest reaches of their realm showed signs of weakening. The time of testing was at hand, and though Thor did not yet carry the hammer that would make him legend, he felt the stirring of destiny in his heart. The thunder that had announced his birth began to sound more frequently in the skies above Asgard, as if the very heavens were preparing for the storms to come. Standing at the threshold of his legendary career, Thor gazed out from the walls of Asgard toward the distant borders where chaos pressed against order. His hand rested on the pommel of his practiced sword, but his heart already reached toward a weapon not yet forged, a hammer that would become the symbol of his unwavering commitment to protect all that was good and just in the Nine Realms. The stage was set for the next chapter of his saga, one that would see the creation of the most famous weapon in all of Norse mythology and the beginning of Thor's true rise to legendary status. ## Part 2. The Forging of Mjolnir and its Cosmic Significance. The hammer that shook the foundations of creation. Discover its true origin story, for it began not with divine decree, but with mischief most foul and a theft that would echo through the halls of eternity. It was Loki, the shapeshifter, the silver-tongued son of Laufey, whose restless nature would set in motion the events that would give Thor his legendary weapon. In those days, Loki's mischief was still counted among the lesser troubles of Asgard, his pranks more irritating than dangerous. Yet it was precisely such a seemingly harmless jest that would lead to the creation of the most powerful weapon ever forged. The trouble began, as many troubles do, with vanity and beauty intertwined. Sif, she of the golden hair, had captured the eye of many gods with her beauty, but it was Thor who had won her heart. Her hair was her greatest pride, not from shallow vanity, but because it was said to shimmer like ripened wheat fields under the summer sun, a living reminder of Midgard's fertility and the promise of harvest. When she slept, her hair would spread across her pillow like spun gold, and even the dawn light seemed pale in comparison. Loki, in a moment of mischief that he would later claim was meant as harmless jest, crept into the chambers where Sif slept and, with a blade sharp as winter wind, cut away her glorious tresses. Perhaps he thought to embarrass Thor, or perhaps he simply could not resist the urge to cause chaos. Whatever his motivation, when Sif awoke to find her beauty shorn away, her cries of anguish echoed through all of Asgard. Thor's rage, when he discovered the deed, was a thing of terrible beauty. The sky above Asgard darkened with storm clouds that crackled with lightning of every color. His voice, when he roared Loki's name, shook the very foundations of Gladsheim. The thunder god's hands, still without his legendary hammer, clenched into fists that could have shattered mountains, and his eyes blazed with the fury of 1,000 storms. Loki! Thor's voice carried across the realm like the crack of doom itself. By my father's eye and my mother's bones, you will restore what you have stolen, or I will use your entrails to braid my beloved a new crown. The trickster god, for all his cunning, knew when he had pushed too far. Thor's anger was not the cold, calculated wrath of Odin, but the honest fury of a man whose beloved had been wronged. It was a force of nature, unstoppable and terrifying in its purity. Loki, backing away from the advancing thunder god, raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. Peace, Thor, peace. I will make this right. I swear it by the roots of Yggdrasil. I know of craftsmen whose skill surpasses even that of the gods themselves. The sons of Ivaldi, the dark elves of Alfheim, they can create hair more beautiful than any that ever grew from mortal or divine scalp. Thor's advance halted, but his eyes remained storm-dark with promise. You will go to these craftsmen, and you will return with hair worthy of my Sif. But know this, Loki, if you fail, if you attempt any trickery, I will personally ensure that your punishment becomes legend among all the realms. And so Loki departed for Alfheim, realm of the light elves, where dwelt the sons of Ivaldi, smiths of incomparable skill. These were craftsmen who had learned their arts in the earliest days of creation, when the sparks that flew from their forges had become the stars themselves. They worked not just with metal and stone, but with the very essence of things, crafting items that existed at the boundary between the physical and the divine. When Loki presented himself before the sons of Ivaldi and explained his need, they listened with the careful attention of master craftsmen evaluating a commission. The eldest among them, whose name was Dane, studied Loki with eyes that held the wisdom of ages. "We can indeed create hair more beautiful than any that grows," Dane said, his voice like the whisper of wind through crystal caverns. "But such work requires payment beyond mere gold or silver. What would you offer for such a creation?" Loki, ever the bargainer, spread his hands with a smile that held just a hint of his trickster nature. "I offer something more valuable than gold, the chance to prove your skill before the gods themselves. Create this hair, and I will ensure that your names are spoken with reverence in the halls of Asgard. Moreover, I will commission additional works, giving you the opportunity to showcase your abilities to the Aesir." The sons of Ivaldi conferred among themselves in their ancient language, their voices like the singing of metal on metal. Finally, Dane nodded. "Very well. We will create hair for the goddess Sif, and we will craft other treasures as well. But know this, shapeshifter, the items we create will be works of such perfection that they—" Loki, thinking only of appeasing Thor's wrath, nodded eagerly. "Create what you will, master smiths. I will bear whatever consequences may come." The sons of Ivaldi set to work with a precision and artistry that would have made even Odin himself pause in wonder. For Sif's hair, they spun gold finer than spider's silk, but gold that lived and breathed, that would grow and flow like natural hair while retaining its divine luster. As they worked, they sang in harmonies that made the very air shimmer with creative force. But the sons of Ivaldi were not content to create merely one wonder. Inspired by their work, they crafted 2 additional treasures. Gungnir, a spear that would never miss its target, destined for the Allfather himself, and Skidbladnir, a ship that could sail through air and water alike, large enough to carry all the gods yet capable of being folded and carried in a pocket. Word of these magnificent creations spread quickly through the realms, reaching even Nidavellir, the realm of the dark elves and dwarves. There, in the depths of the mountain halls, 2 brothers named Brokkr and Sindri heard tell of the sons of Ivaldi's works. These brothers, skilled smiths in their own right, felt their professional pride stung by the praise being heaped upon their rivals. "Brother," said Brokkr, his beard bristling with indignation, "are we to let these upstart elves claim supremacy in the arts of creation? We who have dwelt in the heart of the mountain since the world's beginning." Sindri, the more thoughtful of the 2, nodded slowly. "Indeed, brother, and I perceive an opportunity in this. The trickster god has shown that he values masterwork above all else. If we can create treasures that surpass even those of the sons of Ivaldi, we might gain his patronage as well." When Loki returned to Asgard bearing the 3 treasures, the reception was everything he had hoped for and more. Sif's new hair, when placed upon her head, immediately took root and began to grow, more beautiful than her original tresses. The golden strands caught the light like captured sunbeams, and when she moved, they flowed like liquid gold. Thor's anger melted away like frost before the dawn, replaced by wonder and gratitude. Odin, presented with Gungnir, tested the spear's balance and found it perfect. When he cast it at a distant target, the weapon flew true as destiny itself, striking exactly where he had aimed. Skidbladnir, the miraculous ship, delighted the gods with its ability to sail through air as easily as water, carrying them on journeys that would have been impossible before. The gifts were received with such acclaim that Loki found himself basking in unaccustomed praise. It was then that Brokkr and Sindri arrived at Asgard's gates, their own masterworks in hand. "Loki Silvertongue," Brokkr called out, his voice carrying the authority of a master craftsman. "We have heard of your appreciation for fine workmanship. Would you care to see treasures that surpass even those you have already obtained?" Loki, ever curious and never one to resist a challenge, agreed to examine their works. The dwarven brothers presented 3 items: a golden boar named Gullinbursti, whose bristles shone like sunlight and who could run through air and water faster than any horse; a golden ring called Draupnir, which would produce 8 identical rings every 9th night; and finally, a hammer unlike any weapon ever forged. "This," said Sindri, lifting the hammer with reverence, "is Mjolnir. It will never miss its target, never fail to return to the hand that threw it, and its blow will shatter whatever it strikes. Moreover, it is balanced so perfectly that even the greatest of giants cannot lift it unless they are worthy of its power." Loki examined the hammer with growing excitement. Here was a weapon that would make its wielder invincible, a tool of such power that it could alter the balance of the cosmos itself. His mind raced with possibilities, but it was Brokkr who spoke the words that would change everything. "We offer these treasures freely," the dwarf said, "but we propose a wager. Let the gods judge which set of gifts is superior, ours or those of the sons of Ivaldi. If ours are deemed greater, we ask only for the privilege of claiming a single prize from among the Aesir." Loki, confident in his ability to talk his way out of any difficulty, agreed to the wager. The gods were summoned to judge, and after much deliberation, they declared that while all the treasures were magnificent, the Dwarven brothers' creations held a slight edge in both utility and power. It was then that Brokkr revealed the true nature of their prize. "We claim the head of Loki," he said with a smile that held no warmth, for his boastful words and his assumption that he could command the work of master smiths without consequence. Loki's eyes went wide with alarm, but his quick wit did not desert him. "You may indeed claim my head," he said, "but I never agreed to give you my neck, and surely you cannot take the one without the other." The Dwarven brothers, bound by the exact terms of their wager, were forced to content themselves with sewing Loki's lips shut with thread finer than spider's silk, a punishment that would prevent his silver tongue from causing mischief for a time. But the true consequence of this entire affair was yet to be revealed. As the gods marveled at the various treasures, Odin's gaze fell upon Mjolnir, and his single eye grew distant with the weight of prophecy. "This hammer," he said slowly, "is destined for my son Thor. It will be his weapon in the battles to come, his tool for protecting the innocent, and his symbol of unwavering justice. But more than that, it will be the instrument by which he fulfills his greatest destiny." When Thor first took Mjolnir in his hands, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Lightning crackled around the hammer's head, and thunder rolled across the sky in a continuous rumble that spoke of barely contained power. The weapon seemed to complete him, as if it had been crafted specifically for his hands, his strength, his purpose. The hammer's handle was shorter than ideal, a consequence of Loki's interference during its forging, but this only served to concentrate its power. When Thor lifted it, sparks flew from the contact between divine flesh and dwarven metal. When he swung it, the air itself seemed to bend around the weapon's passage. When he threw it, it flew with the certainty of fate itself, always returning to his hand no matter how far it traveled. But Mjolnir was more than just a weapon of war. It was a tool of creation as well as destruction, capable of blessing marriages and consecrating sacred oaths. In Thor's hands, it became the physical manifestation of his role as protector of gods and men, the symbol of his commitment to stand against chaos in all its forms. The first time Thor used Mjolnir in battle, facing a band of frost giants who had dared to threaten the borders of Asgard, the very nature of warfare among the gods was forever changed. The hammer struck with the force of avalanches, the sound of falling mountains, the fury of storms unleashed. When the battle was over, the giants retreated not just in defeat, but in awe of the terrible power that had been brought to bear against them. Yet for all its might, Mjolnir's greatest power lay not in its ability to destroy, but in its capacity to inspire. When mortals in Midgard saw Thor's hammer raised against the forces of darkness, they knew that they were not alone in their struggles. When the other gods saw Thor wielding Mjolnir in defense of justice, they were reminded of their own duties and responsibilities. Part 3, Early Trials and the Building of Legend. Before Ragnarok, there were trials. See how Thor earned his legendary might through deeds that would echo through the ages, each victory adding another layer to the legend that would make giants tremble at the mere mention of his name. With Mjolnir finally in his possession, Thor's true career as protector of the Nine Realms began in earnest. The hammer had completed him, but he still needed to prove himself worthy of its power through actions that would demonstrate not just his strength, but his wisdom, his compassion, and his unwavering commitment to justice. The first great test came when reports reached Asgard of a group of mountain giants who had taken to raiding the outlying settlements of Midgard. These were not the ancient, powerful Jotnar of the old bloodlines, but younger giants, brutish and cruel, who took pleasure in terrorizing mortal villages. They would sweep down from their mountain fastnesses like avalanches of malice, destroying homes, stealing livestock, and threatening anyone who dared to resist them. Thor listened to these reports with growing anger, his knuckles whitening as he gripped Mjolnir's handle. The thought of innocent mortals suffering while he sat in the comfort of Asgard was intolerable to his nature. Without seeking permission from his father or consulting with the other gods, he set out immediately for Midgard, determined to put an end to the giants' depredations. The journey to Midgard was accomplished by means of his goat-drawn chariot, a magnificent conveyance pulled by two billy goats named Tangrasnir and Tangjoster. These were no ordinary beasts, but magical creatures whose hooves could run upon air as easily as earth, who could traverse the rainbow bridge Bifrost at speeds that made the wind itself seem sluggish. It was during this journey that Thor acquired two companions who would serve him faithfully for years to come. Stopping at a farmstead to rest for the night, Thor was offered hospitality by a poor farmer named Egil and his family. The farmer had little to offer in the way of food, but Thor solved this problem in a manner that would become legendary. "Fear not," Thor told his hosts, "for I carry my own provisions with me." With that, he slaughtered his two goats, skinned them expertly, and set them to roast over the fire. The meat was rich and savory, more than enough to feed the entire household with portions left over. "Eat well," Thor instructed, "but I charge you with this. Do not break any of the bones. Cast them instead upon the goatskins I have spread beside the fire." The farmer and his family obeyed, but the farmer's son, Thjalfi, driven by curiosity and hunger, cracked one of the leg bones to suck out the marrow. When the meal was finished, Thor gathered the bones and placed them on the skins, then raised Mjolnir over them and spoke a word of power. Immediately, the goats sprang back to life, fully restored, save that one now limped slightly due to the broken bone. Thor's eyes flashed with momentary anger, but when he saw the terror in the boy's face, his expression softened. "You have disobeyed my command," he said, "but I see that it was done from need, not malice. Very well. You and your sister shall come with me as my servants, to make amends for this transgression." And so Thjalfi and his sister Roskva joined Thor's household, the boy proving to be the swiftest runner in all the realms, while the girl became a faithful companion to Sif. This act of mercy, turning punishment into opportunity, showed the depth of Thor's character and his ability to find justice even in moments of anger. The battle with the mountain giants proved to be Thor's first real test of his combined might and wisdom. The giants had fortified themselves in a network of caves high in the mountains, from which they could launch raids while remaining relatively safe from retaliation. A direct assault would have been costly and difficult, but Thor devised a strategy that was both simple and effective. Rather than attempting to storm the giants' stronghold, Thor positioned himself in the valley below and began to demonstrate his power. First, he hurled Mjolnir at a nearby peak, the hammer striking with such force that the entire mountain shook and stones rained down like hail. Then he called down lightning from the clear sky, bolt after bolt striking the mountainside until the very rocks glowed with heat. "Giants of the mountain!" Thor's voice carried clearly to their caves, amplified by the echoing stone. "I am Thor, son of Odin, wielder of Mjolnir. You have terrorized the innocent and brought shame upon your lineage. Come forth and face me in honorable combat, or I will bring these mountains down upon your cowardly heads." The giants, seeing the display of power and recognizing the futility of hiding, emerged from their caves to face him. The battle that followed was brief but decisive. Thor's hammer flew like a streak of lightning, striking down giant after giant with blows that echoed like thunder. Those who tried to flee found their paths blocked by precisely placed lightning strikes, while those who stood and fought discovered that their crude weapons were no match for the fury of the storm itself. When the battle was over, the surviving giants knelt before Thor and swore mighty oaths never again to trouble the peaceful settlements of Midgard. Thor, showing the mercy that was as much a part of his nature as his strength, accepted their surrender and even offered them a chance to redeem themselves through service to the communities they had wronged. This first great victory established Thor's reputation not just as a warrior of incredible power, but as a protector who fought not for glory or conquest, but for justice. The tales of his deeds spread quickly through both Midgard and the other realms, carried by traveling merchants, wandering skalds, and the ravens that served as Odin's messengers. But Thor's trials were far from over. Word of his victory over the mountain giants reached the ears of other enemies of order, including a group of sea-dwelling giants who had been plaguing the coastal settlements of Midgard. These creatures, led by a giant named Aegir's brother Hlur, had been capsizing fishing boats and destroying harbors, threatening the livelihood of entire communities. The sea giants presented a different challenge than their mountain-dwelling cousins. They were creatures of the deep waters, able to summon storms and command the loyalty of sea monsters. A conventional battle would favor them, as they could simply retreat to the ocean depths whenever the fighting turned against them. Thor's solution was characteristically direct but remarkably clever. Rather than pursuing the giants into their watery domain, he challenged them to meet him at the boundary between sea and land, the tidal zone where the waves met the shore. There, he declared, they would fight during the turning of the tide, when neither sea nor land held dominance. The battle that followed became the stuff of legend. As the tide turned, Thor stood knee-deep in the surf, Mjolnir crackling with electrical energy that turned the salt water into a conductor for his power. Each blow of his hammer sent shockwaves through the water, stunning sea creatures for miles around. The lightning he called down turned the ocean surface into a sheet of silver fire, while the thunder of his voice competed with the crash of waves against the shore. The sea giants, for all their power over the waters, found themselves outmatched by the sheer elemental fury that Thor brought to bear. When one of them attempted to summon a great wave to sweep the thunder god away, Thor leaped into the air and brought Mjolnir down upon the wave's crest, shattering it into 1,000 droplets that fell like rain upon the shore. The battle ended when Hlur himself, the mightiest of the sea giants, challenged Thor to single combat. The duel was fierce and prolonged, with giant and god trading blows that sent spray flying hundreds of feet into the air. But in the end, Thor's combination of divine strength and righteous purpose proved superior to the giant's raw power and malice. As Hlur lay defeated in the shallows, Thor offered him the same choice he had given to the mountain giants: reform and redemption, or face the consequences of continued defiance. The sea giant, impressed by Thor's prowess and recognizing the futility of further resistance, chose to accept Thor's mercy and swore to protect rather than threaten the coastal settlements. These early victories established the pattern that would define Thor's legendary career. He was not merely a warrior who fought for the sake of fighting, but a protector who used his power to defend the innocent and uphold justice. His strength was always tempered by wisdom, his fury balanced by mercy, and his victories marked not by the destruction of his enemies, but by their transformation into allies or their retreat into harmless exile. The tales of these deeds spread far and wide, carried by merchants and travelers, sung by skalds and minstrels, whispered by mothers to their children as examples of what heroes should strive to become. In Midgard, Thor's name became synonymous with protection and justice. In Asgard, he was recognized as his father's most valuable champion. Even in the distant realms of the giants, his reputation preceded him, causing many potential troublemakers to think twice before embarking on courses of action that might bring the thunder god's attention. But perhaps the most important result of these early trials was the effect they had on Thor himself. Each victory taught him something new about the proper use of power. Each challenge faced showed him another aspect of his own nature. He learned that true strength lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to know when destruction was necessary and when mercy was the greater virtue. As he stood upon the shore after his victory over the sea giants, watching the sun set over waters that were now safe for mortal fishermen, Thor felt the weight of his destiny settling upon his shoulders like a familiar cloak. He was no longer simply the son of Odin, no longer merely a god of thunder and strength. He had become something more, a symbol of hope for the oppressed, a beacon of justice in a world too often ruled by the whims of the powerful, a bulwark against the forces of chaos that would consume all if left unchecked. The trials that would test him in the years to come would be greater and more complex than these early victories, but they would find him ready. For Thor had learned the most important lesson of all, that true power comes not from the strength of one's arm or the might of one's weapon, but from the willingness to use that strength in service of something greater than oneself. Part 4. The Great Deception, Utgard Loki's masterpiece. The giant who tricked the gods. Unraveling Utgard Loki's masterpiece. A tale of illusion so profound that even the god of thunder questioned the nature of his own strength. It was in the third year of Thor's legendary career that he encountered perhaps the most cunning and dangerous of all his adversaries. This was not a foe who would meet him in honest battle, hammer against sword, strength against strength. Instead, it was an enemy who would attack the very foundations of Thor's understanding of reality itself, wielding weapons of illusion and deception that proved far more challenging than any physical threat. The adventure began, as many of Thor's greatest trials did, with Loki's restless nature seeking outlet in mischief. The silver-tongued god had been confined to Asgard for several months following his latest prank, something involving the theft of Freya's falcon cloak and a subsequent chase through 3 realms that had left several important diplomatic relationships in tatters. Bored and eager for adventure, Loki approached Thor with a proposal that seemed innocent enough on the surface. "Cousin," Loki said, using the familiar address that always made Thor slightly suspicious. "I have heard tales of a great fortress in the eastern reaches of Jotunheim, a place called Utgard where the giants hold court in magnificent halls that rival even those of Asgard. Would it not be interesting to see these wonders for ourselves? Perhaps we might even learn something of the giants' intentions toward our realm." Thor, who had been feeling restless himself after weeks of relative peace, found the proposal intriguing. The opportunity to assess potential threats while satisfying his curiosity about the giants' capabilities seemed worthwhile. Moreover, the journey would provide an excellent opportunity to test the skills of Thjalfi and Roskva, who had progressed remarkably in their training but had yet to face the challenges of travel between realms. "Very well," Thor agreed, his hand instinctively moving to rest on Mjolnir's handle. "But we go not as raiders or conquerors, but as explorers seeking knowledge. If we encounter hostility, we will meet it with appropriate force, but we will not seek out conflict unnecessarily." Loki smiled, but there was something in his expression that should have warned Thor of complications to come. "Of course, my noble cousin. A peaceful reconnaissance, nothing more." The journey to Utgard began well enough. Thor's goat-drawn chariot carried the 4 travelers swiftly across the Rainbow Bridge and into the wild lands that lay between the realm of the gods and the domain of the giants. The landscape through which they passed was both beautiful and terrible. Vast forests of trees so tall their tops were lost in clouds, rivers that ran like liquid silver through valleys carved by primordial glaciers, and mountains that pierced the sky like the spears of sleeping gods. As they traveled deeper into giant territory, the very air seemed to grow thicker, charged with an energy that made the hair on their arms stand on end. This was magic of a different sort than that which flowed through Asgard, older, wilder, less refined but perhaps more powerful in its raw intensity. It was on the second day of their journey that they encountered their first sign that this adventure would be unlike any other. As evening approached and they began to seek shelter for the night, they came upon a structure that defied easy description. It appeared to be a hall of sorts, but one built on a scale that dwarfed even the great buildings of Asgard. The entrance alone was large enough to accommodate a dozen giants walking abreast, and the ceiling vanished into darkness above their heads. "This seems abandoned," Thjalfi observed, his voice echoing strangely in the vast space. "Perhaps we could shelter here for the night?" Thor examined the structure carefully, his divine senses alert for any sign of danger. The hall seemed empty, but there was something odd about its construction. The walls were smooth and unmarked, as if they had been carved from a single piece of stone, and there were no windows or secondary entrances visible. "It will serve," Thor decided finally, "but we will take watches through the night. This place has an unusual feel to it." They made camp in what appeared to be a side chamber, a space that was itself larger than most mortal dwellings. As night fell, they prepared to rest, but sleep proved elusive. Throughout the night, the hall was filled with sounds, deep, rhythmic rumblings that seemed to come from the very foundations of the structure, punctuated by occasional sharp cracks that echoed through the darkness like breaking stone. "What manner of place is this?" Roskva whispered, pressing close to her brother for comfort. "It sounds as if the very walls are alive." Thor, who had been lying wakeful with Mjolnir across his chest, sat up and listened carefully to the sounds. There was indeed something organic about the noises, a regularity that suggested not random settling but some kind of biological process. As dawn approached, the sounds gradually subsided, and the hall fell silent once more. When morning came, they emerged from the hall to find their mystery solved in a most unexpected way. Lying in the forest nearby was a giant of such immense size that the hall in which they had sheltered proved to be nothing more than his empty glove. The giant himself was proportioned accordingly, a creature so vast that his head was lost among the treetops, his breathing the source of the sounds that had kept them awake. As they stood gaping at this revelation, the giant began to stir. His awakening was like the rising of a mountain, a slow, majestic process that sent birds flying for miles in every direction. When his eyes finally opened, they were like twin lakes reflecting the morning sky, and when he spoke, his voice was like distant thunder. "Well, well," the giant rumbled, his words causing leaves to fall from nearby trees. "What have we here? Little gods and mortals using my glove as a shelter. I am Skrymir, and I perceive that you are traveling the same road as I. Perhaps we might journey together, for the path to Utgard can be treacherous for those who do not know its ways." Thor, recovering from his initial surprise, stepped forward to respond. Despite the giant's enormous size, he showed no fear, though he kept his hand near Mjolnir's handle. "I am Thor, son of Odin, and these are my companions. We are indeed bound for Utgard, and we would welcome the guidance of one who knows the way." Skrymir smiled, an expression that was visible even at the great distance between his face and the ground. "Excellent. It has been long since I had such interesting traveling companions. Come, let us pool our provisions and journey together in fellowship." The giant's offer to share provisions seemed generous, but it quickly became apparent that there were complications. Skrymir's knapsack, in which he carried his food, was fastened with knots so complex and tight that even Thor's divine strength could not loosen them. The giant himself seemed oddly reluctant to open the pack, claiming that he preferred to eat lightly while traveling. As the day wore on, Thor's companions began to show signs of hunger and fatigue. Thjalfi, despite his supernatural speed, found it difficult to keep pace with the giant's enormous strides. Roskva, though brave, was clearly overwhelmed by the scale of everything around them. Even Loki, usually unflappable, seemed subdued by the strange circumstances of their journey. That night, they made camp in a clearing that Skrymir assured them was safe. The giant settled down to sleep almost immediately, and soon the forest was filled with the sound of his snoring. A noise like avalanches rolling down mountainsides, so loud and persistent that sleep became impossible for his smaller companions. Thor, already irritated by the day's frustrations and now driven to distraction by the giant's snoring, decided to take action. Rising silently, he hefted Mjolnir and approached the sleeping giant. With careful aim, he brought the hammer down on Skrymir's forehead with a blow that would have shattered mountains. The giant stirred slightly and opened one eye. "Did a leaf fall on my head?" he murmured, then rolled over and continued sleeping. Thor stared in amazement. Never before had Mjolnir failed to have its intended effect. The hammer that could level forests and split stone had struck this giant's head with no more impact than a falling leaf. Shaking his head in bewilderment, Thor returned to his companions, but sleep remained elusive. An hour later, the snoring resumed with even greater intensity. This time, Thor's blow was delivered with all the force he could muster, a strike that sent shock waves through the earth and caused nearby trees to sway. Again, the giant barely stirred. Skrymir mumbled, brushing at his forehead. "Must be acorns falling from the trees. Pesky things." And once more he settled back into sleep. The third time Thor struck, just before dawn, he put every ounce of his divine strength behind the blow. The hammer buried itself up to the handle in the giant's temple, and for a moment, Thor was certain he had finally achieved his goal. But Skrymir merely sat up, yawned, and looked around with mild interest. "Well, I suppose it's time to be up and about," he said cheerfully. "Did you sleep well? I thought I felt some bird droppings land on my head during the night, but no matter. Utgard lies just ahead. You'll find it easily enough from here. I'm afraid I must leave you now, as I have business elsewhere." With that, Skrymir shouldered his mysterious knapsack and strode away into the forest, leaving Thor and his companions to contemplate the impossible events of the night. For the first time in his life, Thor had encountered something that seemed immune to Mjolnir's power, and the experience left him deeply unsettled. "There is more to this than meets the eye," Loki observed, his sharp gaze following the giant's retreating form. "Giants may be many things, but invulnerable to divine weapons is not typically among them." Thor nodded grimly, but kept his doubts to himself. Whatever the explanation for Skrymir's apparent immunity to Mjolnir, it suggested that the giants of Utgard might possess powers that even the gods did not fully understand. The thought was both troubling and intriguing, adding an element of genuine uncertainty to their mission. The fortress of Utgard, when they finally reached it, proved to be every bit as magnificent as Loki had suggested. The walls rose like cliffs of polished black stone, their tops lost in the clouds that perpetually shrouded the peaks of the surrounding mountains. The gates were massive constructions of iron and bronze, decorated with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. But it was the inhabitants of #the unveiling of Mjolnir, a saga of Thor's Nordic majesty, continuation. #Part 4. The Great Deception, Utgard Loki's masterpiece, continued, but it was the inhabitants of Utgard that truly captured the traveler's attention. Giants walked the courtyards and halls in numbers that defied counting, but these were not the crude, brutish creatures that Thor had encountered in his earlier adventures. These giants moved with grace and purpose, their conversations carried on in cultured tones that spoke of learning and sophistication. They wore fine garments and ornate jewelry, and their weapons were works of art as much as instruments of war. At the heart of this magnificent fortress sat the Hall of Utgard Loki, the giant king whose reputation for cunning and wisdom was known even in distant Asgard. The hall itself was a marvel of architecture, its vaulted ceiling supported by pillars carved from single tree trunks, each one large enough to serve as a ship's mast. The walls were decorated with tapestries that depicted the history of the giants, from their ancient conflicts with the gods to their more recent achievements in the arts of civilization. Utgard Loki himself was a figure of commanding presence. Unlike the crude giants of the borderlands, he possessed an air of refinement and intelligence that immediately set him apart. His clothing was rich but not ostentatious, his weapons clearly functional rather than merely decorative. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of one accustomed to being obeyed, but also the warmth of a gracious host. "Welcome, son of Odin," Utgard Loki said, rising from his throne as Thor and his companions entered the hall. "Your reputation precedes you, as does that of your silver-tongued companion. It is not often that we receive such distinguished visitors in our humble halls." Thor inclined his head respectfully, though he remained alert for any sign of deception. "We come in peace, Lord of Utgard, seeking knowledge and understanding between our peoples. Your hospitality is already evident in the magnificence of your realm." Utgard Loki smiled, and there was something in his expression that reminded Thor uncomfortably of Loki's own mischievous grins. "Knowledge, you say? How interesting. We giants have always prized wisdom above mere strength, though we recognize that both have their place in the order of things. Tell me, Thor Thunderer, what manner of knowledge do you seek?" "We would learn of your capabilities," Thor replied honestly, "and of your intentions toward the other realms. There have been incidents involving some of your people, and we would know whether these represent the will of Utgard or merely the actions of rogues." The giant king nodded thoughtfully. "A fair question, and one that deserves a fair answer. But first, let us observe the customs of hospitality. You have traveled far and must be weary. Will you not accept our welcome and share in our evening's entertainment?" Thor glanced at his companions, reading agreement in their expressions. "We would be honored." "Excellent." Utgard Loki clapped his hands, and servants immediately appeared bearing food and drink. "But first, let us put aside the formalities of diplomacy and speak as equals. It has been long since we have had visitors capable of providing true competition in the contests that we giants love. Would you perhaps be interested in testing your skills against our champions?" The suggestion was delivered with such casual friendliness that it seemed churlish to refuse. Thor, never one to back down from a challenge, especially one presented so courteously, agreed readily. "We would be happy to demonstrate our abilities, though I warn you that my companions and I have had some small success in such contests." Utgard Loki's smile widened. "Splendid. Let us begin with something simple. Your young companion there," he indicated Thjalfi, "has the look of a runner about him. We have here a lad named Hugi who thinks himself swift of foot. Perhaps they might race." Thjalfi, who had never lost a race in his life, stepped forward eagerly. "I would be honored to compete with your champion." The race was arranged on a long, straight track that ran the length of the hall. Hugi proved to be a young giant, lean and long-limbed, who moved with the easy grace of a natural athlete. As the two runners took their positions, Thor felt confident in his servant's abilities. Thjalfi had outrun deer and wolves, had covered ground so swiftly that he seemed to fly rather than run. The first race was close, with Hugi winning by barely a pace. Thjalfi, surprised but not discouraged, requested a second attempt. This time, Hugi won by a greater margin, and by the third race, he was so far ahead that he was able to turn around and meet Thjalfi halfway back to the starting line. "Well run, both of you," Utgard Loki said, applauding politely. "Hugi is indeed swift, but your man showed admirable determination. Now then, what of you, Loki? Surely you have some skill you would care to display." Loki, who had been studying the proceedings with unusual intensity, stepped forward. "I have some small talent for eating," he said with characteristic self-deprecation. "If you have a champion who thinks he can match me in that regard, I would be happy to oblige." A giant named Logi was summoned, and a great wooden trough was filled with meat and placed between the two contestants. The eating contest that followed was truly impressive to behold. Loki, despite his relatively small size, consumed meat with remarkable speed and efficiency. But Logi proved to be even more voracious, eating not just the meat but the bones and even the wooden trough itself. "Remarkable!" Utgard Loki exclaimed, as if he had never seen such a display before. "Logi is indeed a prodigious eater. But surely, mighty Thor, you have some skill that might prove more challenging for our champions." Thor, increasingly puzzled by the ease with which his companions were being defeated, decided to test the giant's strength directly. "I have some small reputation as a drinker," he said. "If you have a champion who thinks he can match me horn for horn, I would be happy to oblige." Utgard Loki gestured, and a servant brought forth a drinking horn of impressive size. "This is our challenge cup," the giant king explained. "Most of our champions can drain it in a single draft, though some of the less skilled require two. I'm sure a god of your reputation will find it no great task." Thor lifted the horn, surprised by its weight. The vessel was indeed large, but not impossibly so. He had drained vessels twice its size during feasts in Asgard. Confident in his ability, he raised the horn to his lips and began to drink. The liquid within was mead of exceptional quality, smooth and sweet, with a flavor that seemed to change as he drank. Thor drank deeply, expecting to drain the horn quickly, but when he finally lowered it, gasping for breath, he was amazed to see that the level had dropped only slightly. "A good effort," Utgard Loki said, though his tone suggested mild disappointment. "Perhaps you would care to try again?" Thor's second attempt was even more determined. He drank until his vision began to blur, consuming what felt like gallons of the potent mead. Yet when he finished, the horn still appeared to be nearly full. "Curious," the giant king mused. "Well, no matter. Perhaps drinking is not your strongest suit. What say you to a test of strength? We have here a simple challenge. Lift my cat from the floor. It's an old creature, not particularly large, but it has a certain weight to it." A cat was indeed brought forth, but it was no ordinary feline. The creature was enormous, easily the size of a small horse, with fur that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Despite its size, it moved with typical feline grace, settling itself on the floor with liquid elegance. Thor approached the cat confidently. Whatever magic might be at work here, he was still the strongest of the Aesir. He grasped the cat around its middle and lifted, expecting to raise it easily above his head. Instead, he found himself straining against a weight that seemed to increase even as he lifted. With tremendous effort, he managed to raise the cat until only one of its paws touched the ground. "Not bad," Utgard Loki observed. "You managed to lift one paw. Most visitors cannot even budge the creature. But perhaps you would prefer a different sort of challenge? Wrestling, perhaps? My old nurse here is quite skilled, though she's somewhat advanced in years." The old nurse who was summoned was indeed elderly, but she was also clearly a giantess of considerable size and evident strength. Her name was Ellie, and she moved with the careful deliberation of great age combined with formidable power. The wrestling match that followed was perhaps the most frustrating of all Thor's challenges. No matter how he grappled with the ancient giantess, he could not seem to gain the upper hand. She absorbed his most powerful throws with ease, turning his own strength against him with techniques that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. In the end, it was Thor who was forced to one knee, defeated by an opponent he should have been able to overcome easily. "Well," Utgard Loki said as servants helped Thor to his feet, "that was certainly entertaining. I must admit I had expected more from the famous Thor, but these contests have been illuminating nonetheless. Come, let us feast and speak of other matters." The feast that followed was magnificent, with foods and drinks that surpassed even the bounty of Asgard. Yet Thor found himself unable to enjoy the hospitality fully, troubled by his repeated defeats. Never before had he encountered challenges that seemed so perfectly calibrated to exceed his abilities by just the smallest margin. It was Loki who finally voiced what they were all thinking. "Our host is most gracious," he said carefully, "but I cannot help but wonder if there is more to these contests than meets the eye. In all our travels, we have never encountered such specialized talents." Utgard Loki's smile was enigmatic. "Are you suggesting that there might be some element of deception involved? I am shocked that you would think such a thing, silver-tongued god. We giants are known for our honesty, are we not?" The next morning, as Thor and his companions prepared to depart, Utgard Loki accompanied them to the gates of his fortress. It was there, with the walls of Utgard behind them and the road to Asgard ahead, that the giant king finally revealed the truth behind their extraordinary experiences. "I hope you will not think poorly of us," Utgard Loki began, his tone now completely different from the night before. "But I must confess that your visit has been educational in ways you did not realize. You see, we giants have long been concerned about the growing power of the Aesir, and your reputation in particular, Thor Thunderer, has been a source of some anxiety. We needed to know the true extent of your abilities." Thor's hand moved instinctively to Mjolnir's handle. "You speak of deception. Are you saying that our contests were not conducted fairly?" "Oh, they were perfectly fair," Utgard Loki replied, "within the parameters that we established, but perhaps you would be interested to know the true nature of your opponents." The giant king gestured, and suddenly the landscape around them seemed to shift and change. The very air shimmered with magical energy, and Thor realized that they were witnessing the unraveling of illusions so complex and sophisticated that even his divine senses had been completely fooled. "Your young companion Thjalfi," Utgard Loki continued, "raced against Hugi, whose name means thought. He was racing against the very concept of mental swiftness, the speed of ideas themselves. No physical being, no matter how fleet of foot, could hope to match such a competitor." Thor stared in amazement as the truth was revealed. "And Loki's eating contest? Loki represents wildfire," the giant king explained. "Your companion was attempting to out-eat the very force that consumes forests and mountains. He performed admirably, considering the impossibility of his task." "And my own challenges?" Thor asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. Utgard Loki's expression grew more serious. "Your drinking horn, mighty Thor, was connected to the very ocean itself. You were attempting to drain the seas, and the fact that you lowered their level at all is a testament to your incredible power. When the tides next change, sailors throughout the realms will notice the difference." Thor felt a chill of understanding. "The cat, the Midgard serpent," Utgard Loki said simply. "Jormungandr, the world serpent that encircles all of creation. You lifted one of its paws, which is to say, you raised a portion of the creature that encompasses the entire world. No being in any realm has ever accomplished such a feat. And the wrestling match? Ellie is old age itself," the giant king replied. "You wrestled against time, against the inevitable passage of years that defeats all things. The fact that you were able to force even one knee to the ground shows strength beyond measure." Thor stood silent for a long moment, processing the full implications of what he had learned. "And Skrymir," Utgard Loki's smile returned, but it was no longer mocking. "That was me, of course. And your hammer blows? They struck not my head, but the mountains themselves. If you return to that place, you will find 3 valleys carved into the stone, each one shaped by Mjolnir's impact. The force of your strikes was so great that even when misdirected, they reshaped the very landscape." The giant king's expression grew more serious. "We conducted these tests not to humiliate you, Thor Thunderer, but to understand the true scope of your power. What we have learned fills us with both awe and concern. You are stronger than we imagined, more powerful than our greatest warriors, more dangerous than our most dire predictions suggested. "And yet," Thor said slowly, "you chose to reveal your deceptions to me. Why?" "Because strength without wisdom is merely destruction," Utgard-Loki replied. "But strength guided by honor and justice, that is something entirely different. You could have used your power to level our fortress when you realized you were being deceived. Instead, you chose to listen and learn. That tells us more about your character than any contest ever could." The giant king stepped back and bowed deeply. "Return to Asgard, Thor Thunderer, and know that you have our respect, if not our allegiance. The giants of Utgard will not trouble the other realms while you stand as their protector. But know also that we will be watching, and if ever your power is turned toward conquest rather than protection, we will stand ready to defend our people." With that, Utgard-Loki turned and walked back toward his fortress, leaving Thor and his companions to contemplate the extraordinary events of their visit. As they traveled back toward Asgard, each was lost in his own thoughts about what they had experienced and learned. For Thor, the journey had been perhaps the most important of his career. He had discovered that his power was even greater than he had imagined. But he had also learned that there were forces in the universe that could challenge even gods through cunning and wisdom. The experience had humbled him, but it had also shown him the true nature of his strength and the responsibility that came with it. The giants of Utgard had tested him not with crude force, but with challenges that probed the very limits of what was possible. In failing to meet those challenges, he had paradoxically proven his greatness more completely than any victory ever could. For he had attempted to drain the oceans, to lift the world itself, to wrestle with time and age and the fundamental forces of existence. The saga of Thor's encounter with Utgard-Loki would be remembered as one of the most significant episodes in the god's legendary career. It was a tale that spoke not just of strength and power, but of the complexity of truth and the danger of judging by appearances alone. In the halls of Asgard, it would be told and retold, each version adding new layers of meaning to the story of the god who was tricked by illusion but proved his worth through the very manner of his defeat. And in the distant fortress of Utgard, the giants would remember the visit of the thunder god not as a triumph of their cunning, but as a warning of the terrible power that stood between them and their ambitions. For they had learned that Thor was not just strong. He was stronger than the world itself, and that knowledge would shape their actions for all the years to come. ## Part 5. The Serpent's Challenge, Jormungandr's Awakening. The world serpent stirs. When the foundations of reality trembled, and the very concept of courage was redefined in the depths of the primordial ocean. In the years following Thor's enlightening encounter with Utgard-Loki, the thunder god's reputation had grown to encompass not just the 9 realms, but the spaces between them. Stories of his strength had spread so widely that even the most distant corners of creation had heard tales of the god who could shake mountains with his footsteps and whose hammer could shatter the very foundations of the world. Yet it was precisely this growing reputation that would draw the attention of one of the most ancient and terrible creatures in all of existence, Jormungandr, the world serpent, the Midgard serpent, the great Wyrm that encircled all of creation in the depths of the world ocean. Jormungandr was no ordinary monster. Born of the union between Loki and the giantess Angerboa, the serpent was one of 3 children destined to play crucial roles in the coming of Ragnarok. While his siblings, Fenrir the wolf and Hel, goddess of the dead, had been confined by the gods due to the threat they posed, Jormungandr had been cast into the great ocean that surrounded Midgard, where he had grown to such enormous size that he could encircle the entire world and grasp his own tail. For ages uncounted, the world serpent had slumbered in the depths, his breathing causing the tides, his dreams stirring storms across the surface of the sea. But the tales of Thor's growing power had begun to penetrate even the deepest waters, and the serpent found his ancient sleep disturbed by visions of the god who had once lifted his very body, though neither had realized it at the time. The first signs of Jormungandr's awakening came in the form of unusual tidal patterns that affected coastlines throughout the realms. Fishermen reported waters that rose and fell according to no natural rhythm, while sea captains spoke of currents that seemed to flow in perfect circles. as if stirred by some unimaginably vast creature moving in the depths. In Asgard, the wise sought counsel from the Norns, the three sisters who tended the Well of Fate and who alone could read the threads of destiny with perfect clarity. Their response was cryptic but troubling. The serpent stirs in the depths, and the hammer yearns for the testing that has been prophesied since the world's beginning. What has been written in the stars cannot be unchanged, but the manner of its fulfillment remains yet to be determined. Odin, hearing these words, felt the weight of prophecy settle upon his shoulders like a familiar burden. He had known since Thor's birth that his son would face Jormungandr in single combat, and that this battle would mark the beginning of the end times. But knowledge of fate and the ability to change it were two very different things, and even the All-Father's wisdom had its limits. It was during the harvest season, when the fields of Midgard were heavy with grain and the nights were growing long, that Jormungandr made his first direct move. The serpent, disturbed by dreams of the god who had lifted him without knowing it, decided to test this Thor for himself, to measure the strength that had become the stuff of legend. The challenge came in the form of a massive storm that arose from the depths of the ocean itself. This was no ordinary tempest born of wind and weather, but a supernatural maelstrom that seemed to bend the very laws of nature. Ships caught in its path reported seeing shapes moving beneath the waves, coils vast as islands, scales that gleamed like polished shields, and eyes that burned with the cold fire of the deep. The storm made landfall along the coast of Midgard with unprecedented fury. Waves tall as mountains crashed against the shore, while winds howled with voices that seemed almost human in their anguish. Entire forests were uprooted and hurled inland, while rivers were forced to run backward from the sheer force of the storm's surge. But it was not the physical destruction that marked this storm as supernatural. It was the message it carried. Written in the very patterns of wind and wave, inscribed in the language of tempest and tide, was a challenge that could be read by any who possessed the wisdom to understand it. Thor Thunderer, come to the deep waters. Let us test the strength that has become legend. Let us see if the hammer of the gods can match the coils of the world serpent. Thor, standing on the walls of Asgard and watching the storm rage across the distant horizon, felt the call in his very bones. This was no ordinary challenge from an ordinary foe, but a summoning that touched the deepest currents of fate itself. He knew, with the certainty that comes from divine intuition, that this was a test he could not avoid, and perhaps would not want to avoid, even if he could. "Father," he said to Odin, who stood beside him watching the storm, "I feel the pull of destiny in this tempest. The world serpent calls, and I must answer." Odin's single eye reflected the lightning that flickered in the distant clouds. "I know, my son. I have seen this moment in the threads of fate, though I had hoped it might be delayed. Jormungandr seeks to measure your strength, to understand the nature of the power that he will face in the final battle. But know this, he is not yet ready for that ultimate confrontation. This is merely a testing, a prelude to the greater struggle that awaits. Then I will give him a testing worthy of legend," Thor replied, his hand moving to rest on Mjolnir's handle. "Let the world serpent learn what it means to challenge the protector of the realms." The journey to meet Jormungandr required preparation unlike any other quest Thor had undertaken. This would not be a battle fought on solid ground, where his strength could find purchase, but a confrontation in the depths of the ocean, where the serpent held every advantage. Traditional weapons and tactics would be useless against a creature that could use the very sea as a weapon. It was Aegir, the giant lord of the sea, who provided the means for the confrontation. Though technically one of the Jotnar, Aegir had long maintained cordial relations with the gods, serving as host to their gatherings and ensuring that the oceans remained navigable for divine purposes. When Thor approached him seeking passage to the deep waters where Jormungandr dwelt, Aegir listened with the gravity befitting such a momentous request. "What you ask is not impossible," Aegir said, his voice carrying the rhythm of waves against stone. "But it is dangerous beyond measure. The world serpent is not merely large. He is primal, a force of nature given form and consciousness. To face him in his own domain is to challenge the very concept of the ocean itself. I understand the risks, Thor replied, but the challenge has been given, and I cannot ignore it. The strength of the gods must be tested, and if I am found wanting, then at least the knowledge will serve to prepare us for what is to come. Aegir nodded slowly. Then I will provide what aid I can. My ship Naglfar can carry you to the deep waters, and my daughters, the wave maidens, will guide you to the place where the serpent waits. But know this, once you are in the depths, you will be beyond the reach of any help save your own strength and the favor of fate. The voyage to the deep waters took 3 days and nights, during which Thor saw sights that few beings in any realm had ever witnessed. The ocean through which they sailed was not the familiar sea of the surface world, but the primordial waters that existed before the creation of the worlds, vast and dark and filled with secrets that predated the gods themselves. Strange creatures moved in these depths, beings that were neither fully alive nor entirely dead, shapes that defied description, and lights that flickered with colors that had no names. The water itself seemed thick with power, as if every drop contained the potential for creation or destruction. On the third night, as they sailed through waters so still they seemed like black glass, Ran, Aegir's wife and mistress of the drowned, appeared at the ship's rail. Her hair flowed like seaweed in an unfelt current, and her eyes held the depth of the ocean itself. "We have reached the place," she said, her voice carrying the whisper of waves on distant shores. "Below us lies the serpent's domain, where Jormungandr has made his bed in the deepest trenches of the sea. Are you prepared for what you will find there?" Thor stood and hefted Mjolnir, feeling the hammer's weight and the power that flowed through it. "I am as prepared as any being can be for such an encounter. If my strength proves insufficient, then at least I will have tested it against the greatest challenge possible." Ran nodded and gestured toward the water. "Then dive, son of Odin, and may the currents carry you to your destiny." Thor's dive into the primordial waters was like plunging into the heart of creation itself. The water was not cold as he had expected, but warm with the heat of primal forces, and it seemed to support him in ways that defied the normal laws of physics. As he descended, the pressure that should have crushed even a god was held at bay by the divine nature of his mission. The depths through which he traveled were filled with wonders and terrors in equal measure. Schools of fish that swam in perfect mathematical patterns, their scales forming runes that told the history of the ocean. Forests of kelp that grew in spirals reaching toward the surface, their fronds singing with voices that harmonized with the movement of the tides. And everywhere, the sense of vast intelligence watching his descent, measuring his progress, preparing for the confrontation to come. World Tree, Thor found what he sought. Jormungandr lay coiled in rings that stretched beyond the horizon, his massive form creating valleys and mountains in the seafloor. The serpent's scales were each the size of shields, gleaming with their own inner light, and his eyes, when they opened to regard his visitor, were like twin moons reflecting in still water. "So," Jormungandr said, his voice a rumble that seemed to come from the very foundations of the earth. "The god of thunder comes to the depths. I have felt your strength, Thor Thunderer, in the testing at Utgard. When you lifted my body, not knowing what you held, I felt the first stirring of interest in your power. Now I would know the full measure of what you can do." Thor swam closer, Mjolnir creating small lightning bolts in the water around him. "And I would know the strength of the creature that encircles the world. Let us test each other, World Serpent, and see which of us proves the stronger." The battle that followed was unlike any other in the annals of the gods. It was not fought with conventional weapons or tactics, but with the pure application of primal forces, strength against strength, will against will, the power of the storm against the might of the depths. Jormungandr attacked first, his massive coils moving through the water with impossible speed and grace. Each movement created currents that would have swept away mountains, while his jaws, when they opened, revealed teeth like sword blades and a throat that seemed to extend into infinite darkness. Thor met the serpent's charge with Mjolnir raised high, the hammer crackling with electrical energy that turned the surrounding water into a conductor for his divine power. The first blow he struck against Jormungandr's scales sent shock waves through the ocean floor, while the thunder of the impact echoed through the depths like the voice of creation itself. At the very bottom of the ocean, in a trench so deep that it seemed to extend to the very roots of the... But the world serpent was not to be defeated by a single blow, no matter how mighty. Jormungandr's response was to coil around Thor, attempting to crush him with the same strength that could squeeze the life from continents. The pressure was enormous, but Thor's divine nature allowed him to resist, and he struck again and again with Mjolnir, each blow creating explosions of light and sound in the dark depths. The battle raged for hours, with neither combatant able to gain a decisive advantage. Thor's strength was immense, but Jormungandr was fighting in his own element, drawing power from the very ocean that surrounded them. The serpent's coils were like living mountains, constantly shifting and adapting, while his venomous breath created clouds of poison that would have killed any mortal being instantly. It was Thor's tactical thinking that finally began to turn the tide. Realizing that he could not defeat the serpent through strength alone, he began to use Mjolnir's unique properties to his advantage. The hammer's ability to never miss its target allowed him to strike at precisely the right spots on Jormungandr's massive form, while its power to always return to his hand meant that he could attack from any angle without fear of losing his weapon. But it was the serpent's own nature that ultimately prevented either combatant from achieving victory. Jormungandr, for all his power and size, was bound by the role that fate had assigned him. He was destined to face Thor in the final battle at Ragnarok, and until that time came, he could not use his full strength against the thunder god.